Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the webinar. And if you can hear us and see us on the screens, please respond with the yes in the chat box so that we know that you're here, and you can hear us. Very good evening, everyone.
Students, parents, welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining in. If you can see us and hear us, like Dipankar mentioned, please type a yes in the chat box just to affirm that we are visible and audible.
Good evening, Adi. All right, thank you, Tanya. All right, Hanuman, thank you. Perfect. Good evening, Rajesh. Awesome. So we have a lot of people coming in here. And before we go on any further discussing about this exciting domain of architecture and the built environment and what it means for us, we would like to begin with a few ground rules. Number one is that there might be instances where there's a video or an audio lag. Technology is a best friend, but sometimes we can't do it with the glitches there are. So please bear with us. In that case happens, please reconnect. There's a top button which says reconnect on the top of your screens. Please feel free to click that if you have any auditory or visual issues. Please use the chat box responsibly, which is to be able to ask questions, which is to be able to respond to questions that we ask of you. Mindler team is online in the chat box, and they would be helping you sort all of your questions. So please feel free to drop all the questions that you have. We'll also be taking a few questions up for discussions in a broader manner, but feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like. But before we go any further, please ensure that you have strong internet connection so that we don't face any kind of issue while going in the webinar. With that thought, welcome everyone once more to this exciting discussion on architecture, the built environment, and what does it mean for the future. Abhishek, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dipankar. So I'll quickly take this opportunity to introduce our distinguished panelists today. Dipankar and I are really lucky to be joined by Professor Dr. Jaideep Chatterjee. Professor Chatterjee, or fondly known as Jaideep Swiss Army Knife Chatterjee, is an obsessive, compulsive multidisciplinarian. Dr. Jaideep is an architect, a historian, and an anthropologist. With a doctorate in history of architecture and urbanism, and another one in socio-cultural anthropology from the University of Cornell, Dr. Jaideep is an academic traverse person who literally likes to dwell into the norms of design, visual culture, and technopolitics, along with his interest in social formation. His knowledge goes past the domains of post-colonial India, and he has published several papers in the same domain. Dr. Jaideep has taught at several universities, including Cornell, the University of Cincinnati, and the University School of Architecture and Planning, Delhi. In addition to his academic pursuits, Dr. Jaideep also actively collaborates with designers, architects, artists, and filmmakers to work on many interdisciplinary projects. In his free time, he trains his pack of street dogs along with his German Shepherd. He is also a sci-fi nerd who loves to cook and deconstruct everything from restaurant menus to milk cartons. And I have, of course, Mr. Dipankar Jhan here with us as well, and I'm here for the Mindler team. We welcome you all once again to the webinar.
Excellent. All right. So before we go on any further, I do want to be able to speak to you a little bit about what do we mean about spaces? What do we mean about something called architecture? Now, most of us have heard this term architecture somewhere or the other. So would you take a minute or two to be able to respond in the chat box and tell us what do you mean of architecture, or maybe give us a few examples of architecture that you've known? A few of you students, any few of you who could tell us what is architecture and a few examples of architecture that you've seen in your life. any few of you who could tell us a few examples of architecture? Okay, thank you, Poonam. Construction, yes. Construction is a live industry. Okay, Ifra, that's visual construction of buildings, visually appealing. Vedanti, excellent. Nandika, designing structures, example Taj Mahal, absolutely. Rajesh Pandra, Worli ceiling, that's correct. World's largest dome at Pune, Hanumant, excellent. Interior design, all right. Allied structures, designing structures, etc. All right, so most of you are correct with the definitions, which is an architect is a person who designs the plans of a building, a structure where we lead our lives. Now, this structure could be your very homes. The structure could be your office spaces. The structure could be the schools. The structure could be public spaces. This structure could be anything else. A place where we tend to lead some bit of our life, the place that we kind of spend our time with. An architect is a person who creates, conceptualizes, designs the plans for those spaces. Abhishek, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely, Dipankar. I completely agree with that. So, in fact, that's very interesting to see what people are talking about architecture. So, I want to show you something. Now, this view see here as well is architecture as well. And some of you might wonder that this is kind of the new and modern kind of architecture that we look at. And this is one of the most famous pieces of architect by one of the most famous architects. But the idea is has architecture always been this way? When I say this is architecture, I also mean even a Colosseum is architecture. But how has the architecture evolved in a major way? Everything we look at today, we go out on the road and we traveling or anything, wherever we go around the world, we see such unique and exquisite buildings, such expensive architecture. Literally, the buildings that have been made on order. Speak of Antilla, one of the most expensive, I mean, the most expensive house in the world, resides in Bombay. And rightly so, the idea is architecture has evolved in a major way. And like Dipankar was talking about, construction is a part of it. And some of you mentioned about the Bandra Worli ceiling or Burj Khalifa for that matter. Architecture is something that is not just about construction anymore. And today we want to dwell on that fact. Architecture has evolved into a major domain, and there are so many different extended domains that extend from it. One of such domains is built environment that we want to touch upon today. But for that matter, some of you might wonder that built environment, what is that about? More often than not, we have come across students who've never heard about the term. And I don't blame them, because for us, everything that we do with building or construction is just architecture. We have never thought of exploring or understanding what other terms can be. But before I move to that, I quickly want to help students understand how you can pursue architecture, quick briefly, so that we can cover that up. Students, you need PCM to be on in the major reasons to architecture. There are different ways as well. And of course, I want to cover that later when you have specific questions. So without further ado, I want to talk about built environment. I have written down a definition for you. Everything that includes that is human-made surrounding, that is built environment. But built environment is more than that. Everything around us is built environment. From the houses to the schools we go to the institutions we attend, that's built environment. The malls we go to, the offices we go to work, that's built environment as well. Literally from Burj Khalifa to someone who said Bombay ceiling, that's built environment as well. Everything that is man-made or human-made is part of built environment. Even the airport is built environment, and at the same time, a cricket stadium is part of built environment. I want to give you a quick figure. The world population is growing enormously, and that's nothing new to you. But during the 20th century itself, the population in the world has grown from 1.65 billion to 6 billion. It's more than triple. Can you imagine? But what does that mean? To accommodate all these people and the population, we will have to come up with infrastructure, which again is part of built environment. Dipankar?
Thank you. So I think that the definition of a built environment per se is not very difficult. We've all learned as kids that environment is the place, the surroundings in our vicinity where we spend our lives. But when we add the word built associated to an environment, we're essentially talking about man-made structures, about things which are man-made, which are manscaped, etc., which are there in our environment. Now, this could be, for example, something called city parks. And this is where I would want you to focus on the screen and look at this historic, this legendary concept of something called the Central Park in the city of New York. Now, when New York was being constructed, and this is something which we read up online, there's a debate going on this front as well, which is when the city was being constructed, there were a lot of ideas on how to we actually include greenery or the concept of sustainability towards environment in a city like this. like Abhishek rightly pointed out, which is that the world population is growing at an incredible pace. And some cities, such as the one you see on the screen, which is New York City, have faced the more burden of it because of the economic activity. Likewise, in your own country of India, places like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Bangalore, Hyderabad, they face the maximum brunt of the infrastructure lag because more and more people migrate to these cities in terms of so as to find better job opportunities. Sustainability is one of those concepts which is critical to the built environment, which is if we consider our house to be a built environment, we can also consider city park to be a built environment. We can also consider the places where we are spending our lives, for example, in schools, for example, in museums, for example, in touristy places, for example, with monuments, for example, with cafes and restaurants and markets. All of that falls under the domain of built environment. And what you see on the screen right now is one example of it, which is to be able to merge development, to be able to merge economic activity, and yet create a place which is going to provide a little bit of aesthetic, which is going to provide a little bit of aesthetic ease to the person who's always seeing concrete all around. So this concept of Central Park, which is in the New York City, is one such example of a built environment where the environment and the construction or the habitat actually walks hand in hand. And of course, with other cities across the world, there's so many other examples. We can also term the something called vertical forestry also as a part of built environment. Now we understand that as population grows, there's going to be a severe need for infrastructure. These infrastructure would be living spaces, which is residential spaces. These structures would be official commercial spaces. But to be able to get that much access to land, we need to be able to wipe off our forests. And that's something which is not really a good practice to do so. So there's a new concept which is called vertical forestry, again built into our built environment, which is to say, okay, we're going to create hybrid spaces in which we are going to have tall buildings, skyscrapers, in wherein we have residential places, but we're also devoting X percentage, 30%, 40%, 50% of the building verticals to greenery and sustainability. So these buildings that you see on the screen, they are the concept of something called vertical forestry, which is again an example of how sustainability can be built into our architecture. Sustainability can be built into construction. Sustainability could be built into designing and conceptualization as well. Now, architects are the people who design these things. May I please request both the panelists to please mute themselves while the other one is speaking so that there's no voice echo. All right, thank you so much. I think, Harsha, now that much more audible to you. In case the noise still persists, please feel free to reconnect and you would be able to hear us better. So as I was saying, that vertical forestry is one of those concepts wherein you try and use the vertical spaces of a building of infrastructure so as to promote sustainability. Now, all of this is stemming across because we don't have that much horizontal area to have our forests. And that's why we're going to look at vertical spaces where we can build our examples of forestry. Now, in the beginning of the session, Abhishek spoke about a house that's called Antia, and it's in Mumbai, and it belongs to the richest person in Asia. Any guesses who that might be? That's Mr. Ambani. Now, the most striking feature of Antia is the fact that Antia is one of those spaces which is built with a huge amount of investment. Absolutely correct. But also what's really interesting is that the way that it's been designed, there are so many there's so many areas in which it can be used. Now, for example, if things are to be believed, I mean, I haven't seen the insides of Antia particularly, but if things are to be believed, it's one of those spaces wherein you can have literally the rooms moving about an axis. There have been instances wherein we have seen buildings which can change their geometrical shapes because they can pivot about a central axis. All of those areas are concepts that architects today are kind of experimenting with so as to promote better aesthetics, so as to kind of bring that more strikingness to the built environment. Furthermore, an example of a built environment could be what you see in the screen right here. Now, you see a buildings, okay? You see the roadways, you see the cycle stands, and then you see that there's this white space which is built so that people can sit down here in the middle of the road and probably enjoy a cup of coffee. This refers to yet another aspect of built environment, which is called third space. Now, until now, our concept was that there are only two spaces in which things can do. One is the residential space, so homes, apartments, societies, houses, etc. A second is the commercial space, so offices, workplaces, etc., cafes, etc., where there's economic activity happening. But people thought that why don't we have a third space wherein we just need to unwind, where we just need to kind of just lay low, where we need to kind of just have a conversation with the fellow person, which cannot be either residential or it cannot be commercial. So the concept of third space architecture was born, wherein there was intentional measure taken by architects that we need to be able to create spaces which solve a third purpose, which is basically socializing, unwinding, relaxation. Now, this is one example of a third space architecture. Another example that I'm going to give you serves right from memory. So in 2018, I went on a vacation in Switzerland, and this is what hit me. Switzerland is a place of lakes, one. Second, it's a place for mountains. What you'll see is that on every Saturday or a Sunday or a weekend, people would come by the lakeside. They would get across their food, they would get across their proteins, etc., and they would grill and barbecue by the lakeside. Now, it's not like that they carry their barbecues right from home that you're going to have a party. It's the fact that the county, the government, the people involved in the county, they have created public barbecues for people to enjoy. That is yet another example of third space architecture, where all you can do is just come outside, have a great dinner with your family. It's not a residential space, it's not a commercial space, but it's a space that has intentionally been created for unwinding, for relaxation, so as to be able to have a conversation or maybe look at other aspects of utilizing that space in a more effective manner. So that's where a third concept, third space architecture comes in, which is yet another aspect of something called the built environment. Now, I want you to look at all these 5 images up on the screen, and you would see that there are certain similarities between them. Now, this slide particularly, all the 5 pictures are taken from a country called Netherlands. The second picture that you see is the city of Amsterdam, versus otherwise all across pictures are from the country called Netherlands. Now, the reason that you've put across this element of pictures here is to depict a very special reason. Yes, Adi, parks can also be included in third space. Yes. So what you see here is a concept called cycleways. Netherlands is perhaps one of those countries across the world which has the longest system of cycleways. Now, but why would cycleways be counted as a part of built environment? Built environment affects us socially, it affects us mentally, it affects us physically. And to be able to get across the right built environment, the architect in question or the person in question talking about all of these things, they need to have the right mindset. They need to have the right credibility. They need to have the right thinking of doing things. Now, the idea of doing cycleways all across Amsterdam and Netherlands is the fact that if you cycle, people are going to be physically healthy. They're going to do more physical activity. The moment you're doing physical activity, endorphins are being released into your body, which means you are happy as well. And that's perhaps one of the reasons that European nations in general, and Netherlands in particular, is one of those nations which has a higher quality of living. That also resonates with the fact that why people are more happy. That also resonates with the fact that why people think that it's important for them to go outside and connect with one another, connect with nature, connect with activities. So hiking, for example, or going on long walks and long cycle treks, etc., is a very common practice. But do you think would all of this would have been possible if there was no infrastructure to support? Absolutely not. Now, for example, I would like to redirect your attention to the first picture here. Now, the first picture, you see that there's a lake and there's this long bridge on it, and then there's a cycle moving in between. It's not some concept model. This is actually happening in the state, in the country of Netherlands, where a lake has not been disturbed. It's just that a cycleway has been constructed in the middle of the lake, and as you can go by, you can put your hand in the lake water and feel the gush of it flowing through. That's how imperative, that's how creative, that's how conceptual the built environment can get. And all of this has a direct effect on our psyche. All of this has a direct effect on our health. All of it has a direct effect on life expectancy. So it's one of those areas where we have direct access to the built environment and how it affects us. This is a study which is conducted by a lot of people, a lot of universities across the world, which is How does the construction industry, how does the architecture industry, how does the built environment affect us mentally? How is mental health, which is something so intangible, connected to the spaces that we are in? I remember somebody, and I was talking to this student back in Canada, and this person said, "I want to be able to prioritize a city over another city because I didn't like the second city." And I was like, "Okay, you got through a better university, but where is this coming from? Why do you like that city? That city is always gray. That city does not have a park. That city does not get sunlight. That city is always, 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 all around. I just see concrete." Now, all of that can really mess with your head. And that's where built environment gives us that mental health, gives us that boost in physical, mental, and social well-being. Another flip side to built environment is what you see in the screen right now. Disability is one, or people with disabilities are the ones who struggle the most with architecture, with the ease of access, with having to depend on people where they don't want to depend. Now, look at, for example, the second picture here where there's this guy on a wheelchair and he's trying to pick out books from a library. Now, this library is specially designed in a manner that the upper floors are restricted to people who can walk normally and pick up the books as per their heights, maybe take some ladders and kind of climb on them and take up the books. But they understand that a lot of the population is not able to do that. So there's an entire section dedicated to those people where the height of the columns, height of the bookcases are not as high. They don't want people to feel left out. They don't want people to feel that they need somebody to depend on so as to do something as basic as take a book out of a library. They don't want people to feel that they need somebody else because they are disabled in a manner. And that's something that basic consideration in design has actually led to creation of this library, wherein a person can actually get on a wheelchair and pick up their books independently without having to request anybody or someone else that please help me support it. Likewise, you'll see in the third picture here, which is the first on the left, which is this person who has a walking stick and is taking the help of the surface which has dots. Now, for example, if you're navigating across a hallway or across a passageway, and you have no way of figuring out whether this is the dead end, maybe just one small patch in between the walls to be able to say that please continue this manner, so that the person can know without having to depend on somebody else that they feel that I don't need to be supported to something as basic as walking. And that's where something like this can also be in place. Airports, metro stations, train stations, all of them have this kind of a system wherein they're able to help the physically challenged, the people who cannot see, or the people who cannot walk as properly. There are systems which are considered and plowed by architects, by people who are specialists in built environment, so that they can have a positive self-esteem. Likewise, you see this beautiful staircase in the first picture, but how is it I'm going to go upstairs, or how is it that I'm going to go, let's say, on the top if I'm in a wheelchair? Or if I'm somebody who's supporting, let's say, a blind person, how am I supposed to get across them to the top without hurting their self-esteem or without getting them to feel that they need somebody else to depend on? And you see this small diagonal where you start as a rampway and then you can take a turn and go on the other ramp. In the middle of a staircase, that's how impactful this field of architecture, built environment really is, because it's not just a space where you construct a building or you build a building or you design a building. It's about spaces where people live. It's about spaces where people commute their lives. It's about spaces where people feel happy. So happiness, mental well-being, physical well-being, social well-being, it's all dependent upon spaces and how accessible, how bright, how systems are actually present. But this was all indoors. Let's talk about something called a built environment outdoors. Now, this is pretty much a common sight in India, right? You would see long traffic jams, and if by heavens it rains, it becomes a huge pond and a puddle. Now, what you're seeing on the screen are images from two cities across India. Both of them are cities in northern part of the country, and both cities can be considered as examples of a built environment gone wrong versus the built environment gone right. Okay, so the pictures in the left side of the screen where you see huge traffic jams and this really kind traffic policeman who's standing in the puddle trying to navigate the traffic, they are from the city called Gurgaon. Now, no offense to Gurgaon, but it really becomes a swimming pool when it rains and there's huge amount of traffic jams. The images that you see on the right are from the city called Chandigarh. It's again the state capital of Punjab and Haryana, and these are images from Chandigarh. Now, I don't mean to say that Gurgaon is bad versus Chandigarh is great. All I'm saying, it all depends on the planning of how the city is planned. Now, for example, in Chandigarh, if it rains, the material of the roads is such that they are able to absorb water and put it down to the groundwater levels, which basically means there is no amount, whatever amount of rain pours down, there's not going to be a waterlog. The same cannot be said for Gurgaon, where if it rains for 10 minutes, it's all puddles. Likewise, the system of Chandigarh, the traffic system of Chandigarh is built in such a manner, the city is planned in such a manner wherein you will not encounter as many red lights, number one. You will have far more greater number of round circles than in any other city, but you will never, ever, ever face a traffic snarl that you face in Gurgaon, the one that you can see in pictures. So what you see in terms of infrastructure outside your house, such as transportation, such as waste management, such as water management, such as public malls, for example, gardens, parks, everything outside of your residential space, of your personal space, is also a part of something called the built environment. So built environment is not just about the home that you live in. Built environment is all about the places, the environment that you spend your time. So whether you're spending 3 hours commuting from your place to your office and vice versa, or you're spending 3 hours in school, or you're somebody who's spending few hours in a cafe writing, all of that is a part of your built environment. And that's where I do want to give you a little bit of insight on what's going to come next. The next era of built environment is going to be smart buildings, which is they are going to be Wi-Fi accessible. They're going to be IoT accessible. And this is something which is already happening. So I have a friend, again, staying outside the country in a place called London, which is in the UK. And I was just video calling with him the other day. And he told me that he's just got to his apartment, but he needs to park the car, and then he can speak. And I was like, okay, do you want me to call back after 2 minutes? Because, you're parking and stuff. He says no. So all he did was he went and stood his car in front of the garage. There's a camera which is set up on the garage handle. It scans the number of the car, which is the number plate of the car, and if it's genuine, the garage automatically opens up, and the person can simply can simply drive around the car into the garage without having to get out, open the gate, get out, close the gate, get back into the car, and then move forward. So you imagine just by how complex, just by how one architect's thinking or one person's thinking that this problem needs to be eradicated. There's a huge new concept which is being adopted by architects and specialists from the world over, which is how to make architecture smart. Abhishek, your thoughts?
Perfect, Dipankar. Thank you so much for that. And that's a very interesting point that you mentioned. So in fact, because you're talking about Internet of Things and how that will help the built environment to evolve, then we can talk about concepts like smart cities. I think that's the idea behind it. And I think we have the right city as an example. This is the picture of a city of Melbourne, one of the most ideal cities to live in, for the one simple reason. It's not just a combination of a metropolitan which has a taste of nature. It allows people to get from one place to another in no time and provides for every facility needed. And like Dipankar was talking about how convenient and how efficient things are in a particular city. I think that's the idea and essence behind a built environment. One very important point I want to cover is about, Dipankar has covered about how health and how mental health in particular is affected by the kind of environment we live in, the kind of structures we have around us. Just in extension to that, I want to share a particular example from a study that I was just reading from a professor in Stanford. She goes on to say that, I'll just share an example. Now, there was a study done by Stanford 2 years ago where they observed two patients in a hospital who came right after the surgery and they were staying in a hospital. They have two recovery rooms. Now imagine, and I want you to reply to this. Now imagine one of the patients goes to a recovery room with a window, with a view of the nature and a garden right outside the hospital. The other patient in another room had a view of another recovery room with another patient out there. They observed both the patients and they did the same process for a number of patients throughout a particular, I think, duration of 6 to 12 months. Now, can you guess which patient was discharged early from the hospital? Anyone, can you guess? Do you want to take a chance and understand which patient would have left the hospital sooner? The one with the garden view outside the window, or the other patient with the view of another recovery room outside the window? Anyone? It's a very simple question, to be honest, but I want anyone to answer. The one with the view. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Miss Nina. And that's the idea. I mean, that whatever we have, I mean, just imagine, no, just having a window with a different view, change it completely for the patient. It helps them recover sooner. And that's the idea. That is how the structures around us literally have a significant and a direct effect on how we are as people, how we change. To be very honest, one very interesting fact, which I think I'll just take up with Dr. Jaideep as well, and I'll soon invite him to speak about this. We were discussing this yesterday, how the built environment impacts us as human beings. And one very interesting study about this fact is as well, that how zip code where we live in is more important to our health than our genetic code. Isn't that interesting? Just imagine where we live. For example, let's say we all live in a particular complex. Now, I need a space to walk, a space to cycle, like Dipankar was talking about Netherlands and Amsterdam in particular. I have personally been to Amsterdam, and I can tell you the city is so friendly when it comes to cycles, and people can walk around all the time. It makes the city so lively and healthy. The other thing is, do I have a fresh grocery store? Do I get supply of fresh food and vegetables where I live? Is there a hospital nearby? Is there a school nearby? All these small facilities contribute to you in a major manner. And that is the idea where built environment comes into the picture. It's not just about constructing a fancy building. I mean, it takes a lot of effort by an architect, but how it has evolved and contributed to our life is how built environment will change. Now, I just quickly want to shed light on the kind, I mean, this is a classic example that I extracted for you of how the European built environment works. I wanted to take a second and have a look at it. Even the different types of buildings are mentioned. Let's say they're flexible buildings, they're cognitive buildings. A cognitive building is basically about taking into consideration how human beings, what is cognitive science? It's about how human beings think and perceive things. That is the idea. Imagine enabling that with a particular building. How we think, integrating that, anticipating how a person might perceive a particular area. Like Dipankar was talking about, making buildings or structures friendly for people with disabilities. That is taking a step ahead for an architect. Similarly, I want to just show you the kind of careers that will extend. And with this, the next thing would be to invite Dr. Chatterjee to take the conversation forward, because he has brilliant insights about the same. So you look at any domain possible, right from real estate, which is, or construction industry, which are the most ideal careers, the traditional careers you look at, to extending to facilities management, building services management, or the new kind of careers, sustainable development, how the structures we are making can be sustainable and friendly to the environment, or waste management, how the kind of structures we build will reduce the waste that the offices or industries are producing. Dr. Chatterjee, may I please request you to switch on your video? Yes. So what are your views about this very interesting domain?
All right, I have a small presentation that I would like to share with the students. So thank you, Abhishek and Dipankar. Wonderful introduction to the built environment. Just a small thing I would like to add, and which kind of you will realize, and it follows from my presentation. Actually, architects are not responsible for making the built environment. Can I give you an idea? In a developed country like the United States of America, what do you think is the percentage of buildings made by architects? Any guess? Anyone? Any guess? Give it, I mean, anyone. I mean, students, you all, anyone, who are here. What do you think is the number of buildings that are made?
30%, 35%.
It's about 2.5%, right? It's about 2, and in India, it's about 0.07%. So actually, much of the built environment actually is the built environment is actually a much, much larger domain, right? Architecture is a very, very small domain out of it, right? So that's just one thing I wanted to throw out there. But, can I share my screen with everyone? Because I have something to...
Of course, yeah.
Right. So the first slides I'll go by really quickly because I think both Dipankar and Abhishek have covered some of those things. Right. So just stay with me for a second while I switch it on what's called the screen share. All right. All right. Let's see. Am I being able to share my screen? For some reason, it is not letting me. Okay. Yeah. Perfect. I've got that. All right. Wonderful. Share the screen and we can
see it, sir.
You can see the screen?
We can see
Perfect.
it. Yes,
I'm
yes.
just going to begin the slideshow. All right, perfect. All right, so I had actually thought I would ask this question, but you guys did. So I think you gave a wonderful definition of it, and you gave some wonderful examples of it. Right? Yes, it's a very simple definition actually. Any environment that is built by humans. In fact, I will take it a step further. Can any of you think of any environment in the world that is not built by humans? Well, you might think, okay, a forest is not built by humans. That's not true. Because think about what we do. We manage a forest, we change its angle, we circumscribe it. So in fact, even something like a forest today is actually built by us, right? Because we actually do go ahead and manage it. We circumscribe its boundary. We make sure it stays where it is. All of that is there, right? And you guys gave some wonderful examples. I was just going to show some slides. So things like infrastructure, factories, parks, neighborhoods. That's a view of Delhi. Cityscapes, villages. Right? We didn't talk about that too. All of it built environments completely. Now, what I want to share with you is a little video by the World Bank that was created for India a few years ago now. And I'm just going to share it and we'll talk about this a bit. It's a very short video. Bear with me. There may be some lags in the thing, but just let's see. Presents South Asia with a big opportunity to transform This is urbanization. Governments need to reform All right. I don't know if you all could hear it, but I'll give a short recap to the video. So what the video is saying is that, and this was about 15 years ago or so, this report had come out actually. So one of the first thing it said is that in a place like India, the growth of the built environment is actually the biggest mover and engine of economic growth, right? It's the biggest, and the problem in India is that one of the reasons why we are not being able to get the kind of growth that we want is actually because our built environment, right, has immense problems, right? One of the biggest problems, they identify two problems. There's something called messy urbanism, something called hidden urbanism. What this means is we actually don't know, we don't even know in our country how many people are living in urban spaces. To top it all, as this video tells you, India by about 2025 is looking at about 250 million people who are going to live in our cities alone. Let me give you an idea of what that means. That's roughly the population of the United States of America, right? That many people are just going to live in our cities alone, right? So how did the government of India respond to this? Okay, some of you may have heard of this, Dipankar and all mentioned it at the beginning. So all from about 2014 onwards, chiefly in 2015, we started on something called smart cities, right? And you can see here, it says smart cities engines for Indian economy, right? A lot of things were planned. We were to plan about mobility. There was planning about how to make governance a smart issue. How can we make our climate, our environment a kind of a smart issue? And at the center of all of this was the smart city, right? Which was going to give world-class infrastructure, which was going to give a wonderful livable spaces, sustainable communities, all of that in India today, right? Now, wonderful plans, all of that, money was dispersed. However, here was what was the result. These are all from about the last 2 to 3 years, right? Most of this has failed in India. Most of this has failed in India, right? None of it is really working, okay? Right? The reason is not because it was a bad idea, but something else. I'm going to share with you a little screen which says there's something called the Center for Policy, which is there in Delhi, which did a study of what happened. Why did it not really work, right? So I don't want you to go through everything, but let me just tell you one of the brief things. What they noticed was that the Smart Cities project and this idea to really change the built environment of the country, everything that they wanted, exactly the opposite started happening. So if they wanted local governance, local people's participation on it, that did not happen. If they wanted people to come in and finance to come in, both local, private, public finance to change our cities, that did not happen. If it was to shift away power from a central governance and give it back to the people, to the actual people who use the city, that did not happen, right? Why? That's the big question, right? What the Center for Policy's report said was one single line for it. There is a lack of qualified professionals in India who can actually engage and design such initiatives. Let me tell you what is the situation in India today. All right. Now look on front of you, you see a wonderful sort of a graphic, For people to work, to change the built environment, we need people who can work. If you look on your right side of your screen, we need people who can work at the neighborhood level. We need people who can work at the city level, the metropolitan level, the national level, and then finally what's called the supranational or the international level. Now, if you've seen that, look on your left at the bottom corner. Let's take a country like UK. UK has about 38 accredited people who are working per 100,000 people who are working in the area of the built environment, trying to change their cities, manage the city, manage the villages, manage the infrastructure, do all of that, right? But think of safety, think of housing, think of policy changes. Or Nigeria, which we would think is a much poorer nation than India, right, has about 1.44. Look at the number for India. It has 0.23. We actually have one of the lowest numbers of qualified professionals who are required to work in this sector. Part of the reason is, and this is why I raised the issue about architects, is that for a while, and mostly in India, one thought that architects are the ones who are supposed to deal with this. Actually, architects are not very qualified to deal with the totality of the built environment. They really aren't. They are mostly people, and I was trained as an architect, right, earlier, designing a particular building, right? The other people who we had were people like town planners, but what was very interesting is that town planners were mostly economists. They did not know how to design work on ground, right? So they would come up with some financial model, but nothing would really happen on ground, right? So what do we do, right? You have to realize that the built environment is actually the largest industry in the world. Let me give you another statistics, okay? In India, in the latest economy survey, what they have said is we need an investment of $1.4 trillion. Let me give you what that number means. That's basically the GDP of India. That is the amount of investment we need over the next 5 years. And what we need are 44 million skilled jobs. Right? I'm not talking 10,000. I'm saying 44 million. That's an unbelievably large number. That's what the Indian government has to achieve. And that's the kind of opportunity that's out there, right? That's 44 million skilled jobs. But what kind of people do we need, right? We need people who can work on housing. We need people who can, all our building codes, all our city design codes are all outdated. We need people who can work on social justice and equity and distribution in the city. We need those who can make our cities resilient. We need those who can understand how waste management works. We need those who can understand how infrastructure services work. We need those who can work on land reform, who can work on policy reform. We need those who can work on how design and governance and aesthetics comes together, right? We need those who can work on understanding on, Abhishek and Dipankar talked about it, accessibility, what is called universal accessibility, so that buildings and spaces are accessible by all people, whether you're regularly or differently abled, right? We need to change our laws. We need to figure out financing systems for our built environment. All of this work is to be there, right? What kind of graduates are actually needed for the jobs, right? I'm going to give you, this is an interesting proposition. What you need, and this is an interesting study, what people are saying is something called a T-shaped graduate. Let me tell you what a T-shaped graduate is. Part of the problem, and I raised this right at the beginning, is that in our country, we have always thought, oh, if I'm doing architecture, I must do architecture, nothing else. Or I'm doing engineering, I'm doing that, right? I'm a doctor, that's what I'm doing. More and more we are realizing, right, all over the world, that the problems of the world don't come with a label attached to them. The problems of the world don't tell you, oh, I can only be solved by a doctor. Oh, I can only be solved by an engineer. In fact, what one is realizing is that to solve a problem as complex as the built environment, you need people who can be what are called T-shaped. That means you have a core area of discipline, and then the top arm of the T, which you see in front of you, allows you to have multiple expertise across different disciplines. Because even to make a small change in our built environment, you need to bring together a whole lot of systems of knowledge, from law to policy to design to economics to finance, all of it, to sociology to psychology, right? How do you begin to do this, right? So one of the things I'll tell you are, so what are the kind of skills that are required today and in the next 20 years to develop the built environment of the 21st century, right? So first, we need skills that are required for the design and management of infrastructure. This includes transport planning, urban health, sanitation, smart cities, pedestrian-friendly environments, one of the biggest problems in our cities. We need what is called crowdsourced development. We need what is called disaster mitigation. We need construction and project management. We need waste management. India is the third largest producer of solid waste. We have about 4 companies in the country managing this, right? This is unbelievable. All right. We need skills that are required in the private-public development sector. We need people who can make policy about built form. We need people who can guiding development, developing legal codes, doing what's called community-sourced building projects, right? We need folks who can understand what's called building information modeling. We need folks who can do master planning. We need those people who have skills in planning and development of communities and neighborhoods, right? So we need people who can do what I call ecological assessment of built forms, right? How does the environment with finance, with building waste, so this is the entire ecology. How does that work? We need people who can actually do proper historical analysis of settlement in communities. Dipankar earlier was mentioning Gurgaon. You know, one of the reasons why Gurgaon gets flooded the way it is? Because when Gurgaon was developed, nobody looked at the historical city, what was there. The problem was Delhi in the 18th and 19th century was essentially part of the Aravalis, but Delhi had these natural catchment areas of water everywhere. That's how the city used to be designed, right? But in 1911, and from especially after independence from 1960, when the first master plan of Delhi was made, they completely ignored all of this. They ignored the entire historical development of the city. As a result, they filled up all the natural lakes and man-made lakes that were there. Some of you who are from Delhi can even see these today. You know, that's what the name Hauz Khas means. Hauz was actually a man-made lake. Hauz Rani is another one. So there were these hauzes and baulis all across Delhi. All of that got neglected. We need folks who can do what I call sociological analysis of our towns, cities, and inhabitants. We need people who can do study of human settlements and very, very importantly, human and non-human ecologies, animal-human relations, because we look at our streets. Our streets have all kinds of beings in them. How does this ecology work from flora to fauna to human? How does all of this work, right? We need people who can do this. Now, keeping some of these things in mind, you know, one of the things that we've done, right, at the school is created a very unique, first of a kind program in India. Although this program is there all over the world for a very, very long time, what it does is it combines a design curriculum with the liberal arts and social sciences to produce unique professionals who can actually manage and produce the built environment of the future, right? So the program has kind of two pathways that I would like to sort of talk to you about and tell you how this works, right? There's something called a community planning and development thing, and there's something called an architectural studies pathway, right? So who are community planners and developers, right? Community planners and developers are key individuals who actually improve quality of life through recommendations such as how to build public transit system, how to develop walkable communities, how to create affordable housing, how to do sustainable building practices, how to historically preserve things, right? They are involved in making communities livable, right? How to regulate land use, how to develop design guidelines, how to do different kinds of financing packages to develop the built environment. They are also instrumental in making sure that multiple stakeholders can come together and make the decision process, right? Similarly, there's something called the architectural studies graduates, right? They are folks who kind of engage with the built environment from the point of view of nature, from culture, from history, politics, and society, right? They are very, very interested in making our built environments just, safe, and equitable, right? And they kind of also work with, again, different levels of the government, different levels of the society, right? Engaging a whole lot of stakeholders, right? How does this really work? All right, well, how it works is, you know, you have your regular design curriculum, but what you also have is something a little special, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. It's called a minor curriculum, all right? We have some students, I'll show you some work that these kind of students who are in this program are actually doing. Now, what you see in front of you is actually one of India's first LEED certified. LEED is an international organization that certifies building energy consumption. This Unnati complex, Unnati Gainwell complex, is actually a complex in Noida, Greater Noida, which is one of India's most sort of highly certified LEED buildings. However, the Unnati people, they actually realized that we could do one step better. So they got in touch with our students who are in this program, and what the students did was worked with the company and reduced the energy consumption of the building by about 30%, right? After the LEED certification. So now the Unnati Gainwell building is one of the only platinum rated buildings in the country, right? Here's another example of the kind of work that people do. Now, what you see in front of you is actually a village in Garli in Himachal Pradesh. Gurley is very interesting. Gurley has gotten designated as a historic heritage village. However, the lake that you see in front of you was completely unusable, right? So what the students did, these are some of the students who are in the second year of the program, they actually went and worked with the community on how one could really change and clean the lake, and the lake then became the center of the community, right? This is the kind of thing that both Dipankar and Abhishek were talking about. So how do you intervene, taking everybody along? Multiple stakeholders, there's the government, you can see, because it was in the Himachal, it was very close to an army base, they were involved in it, right? The local villagers were involved in it, right? The government was involved in it. Everybody, how does one create development and of the built environment which benefits everybody, right? This is one of the central things that happens. Now, what are the kind of courses that you take to become somebody like this? Okay, you take courses in what are called adaptive reuse. You take courses in what are called audits and assessments, because you learn how to audit a building. You can do what's called a safety audit of a building. You can do what's called an ecological audit of a building. You can do what's called an environment audit of a building. You can even do what's called a gender audit of a building, right? You can do universal design audits. You look at questions of environment ecology. You understand how land works, right? Something you design, something called system design. You see, system design is one of the most important kind of things that you need to learn. How do we design systems which are resilient, which don't fail if one element of that system goes wrong? We need to understand how do we climate proof our built environment, right? Most of the buildings in our country are not climate proof. There's no talk of how our built environment, many times during the previous discussion, there was so much talk on how much health and safety are critical to the built environment. So then you have to take courses in health and safety management. You have to take courses in infrastructural management. You have to understand how building skills and textures work. You have to understand how sites, services, infrastructure actually relate to the built environment. But what's the twist, and this is perhaps the most interesting thing, is something called a minor, which is there, right? This goes back to the idea of the T-shaped graduate that I was talking about, right? So the idea is that you get a design degree, right? You get a design degree, but what you have to realize is that if you want to work with the built environment, a traditional architectural degree will not really work. A traditional civil engineering degree will not really work. A traditional economics degree will not really work. You want somebody who's actually going to be able to talk across these fields. The interesting thing that one is realizing is that the best place for those who are working on the built environment and working on our cities and working on our towns is actually at the intersection of different knowledge systems, right? So what you can do as part of this course is kind of develop all of these minors. So you could actually do a major in design, but do a minor in something called liberal arts. You could do a major in design, but do a minor in business studies, right? So that's the way that this T-shaped kind of a graduate really works. All right, what does this really do? Why does it really work like this? All right, so let's say you are doing community planning and development. So you will learn all of these things called space design, system design, la-di-da, all of that. But like I said, there are 44 million jobs out there, and those jobs are not really as an architect, not really as an interior designer anymore, right? You combine it with something like sociology, and here are the kind of jobs that become available to you, right? So you can become what's called a community and regional developer. You can become what's called a civil services administrator, right? You can become what are called city managers, development professionals, historic district managers, housing managers, local government officers. Or you could perhaps combine this with, let's say, some systems and infrastructure, or sustainability and environmental studies, or even real estate and construction management. Suddenly, you can become all of these things. These are part of all those jobs that we need in our country, right? Which are there. The government wants to fund it, but we don't have professionals, right? So green building managers, infrastructure and system designers, smart cities consultants, transportation planners, environmental managers, the list goes on and on and on. It's same, I'm just taking you very quickly through all of this. So, if you have more questions, we can go back to the question and answer session, right? But, that's the way it works, right? So all of these very different kinds of jobs, which are very much the need of the hour in our country, right, become available to you, all right? The interesting thing about this program is once you actually do graduate from the program, you can go ahead and do a master's degree program in architecture, planning, regional studies, urban landscape design, all of that. In fact, the interesting trend all over the world is that architecture, design, all of these are becoming more postgraduate subjects, not really undergraduate subjects anymore. What's also interesting, if you have a minor, is that because you do something more than 24 credits, the minor area of your study can actually become your chosen area of study in your master's. So, we have students, and I have former students who started off doing an undergraduate in design, then did a minor in sociology, and then went to University College of London, right, to do a master's in how environment, ecology, and design work together, right? Which was not even his major area of study in the at an undergraduate level, right? There's some wonderful people I would like to introduce you. You can actually sort of feel free to write to any of them who have become a part of this program. So there's Alok Panda, who's a kind of an architect, but also a PhD in what's called city management. Aditya, who's actually a journalist, but then a geographer and works on the built environment. Abu, who is a health and safety expert, who is trained as an architect, but then went on to do a master's in health and safety expertise. There's Girish. Girish is actually one of the main designers of the Los Angeles metro system and has over 25, 30 years of working all over the world in this. Wills is a lawyer and an architect and a project manager. So you see, these are the kind of people who work with the built environment. At the middle of all of that is me. Let me give you a bit about myself. Although my initial degree was in architecture, I started off, my master's was in history, theory, and criticism, and then another master's in cultural studies. Then I went on to do my PhD in history of urbanism, and then a third master's in anthropology and a second PhD in anthropology, right? And interestingly, like for example, one of the things that I work on is, you all may have heard of something like PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now you would think like, what is PricewaterhouseCoopers, architecture, what is this all about? Well, let me give you an example. Here's what I do. PricewaterhouseCoopers was working with the Indian government to design all the Anganwadi schools in India, where little children come and they sit, they get their midday meal, they get to go to school, they get to do they needed somebody who actually has an expertise in understanding how societies work, how culture works, and design. Yeah, that was me. Yeah, that's how this thing. That's what I mean by saying this is the kind of profile we need to build in order for us to become these, for us to get all of those newer kind of jobs which are emerging in the built environment. I'm going to stop here now.
Right.
And probably open up the floor for questions that you all would like.
So before that, I first want to say that I think I'm speaking for everyone's behalf who's here, that you've changed our perspective about the domain of architecture for good, because I honestly think the kind of insights you brought to the table were very necessary, and I think that's exactly what we need now. And I think that's the kind of change we need to evolve, because we know that there's a requirement, but we are not working towards it. So thank you so much for that, sir. I actually have a question for you in particular. You very well explained the course at OP Jindal, which is an amazing course. What I want to know is what kind of exposure they have, not just in terms of corporates and everything, but is there any international collaborations that you have that students are part of?
Absolutely, absolutely. So let me. So I talked a lot about the kind of live projects that they're all doing. Why they're first and second year, Abhishek, right? But
Right.
if you notice the group of people who have come together, all of us are actually trained. I myself, for example, have lived and worked in the US for the last 15 years, and so has everybody. So all of us have extremely intimate contacts with almost all of the top universities in the world, right? So whether it's University College of London, whether it's Cornell, that's where my alma mater, Harvard, which is our dean's alma mater, University of Cincinnati, these are all places and where our students are going not only for short trips but for semester exchanges, and we are doing collaborative studios with them, right? So they work on a certain area in their country, we work on a certain area in our country, and then we bring our insights together and we learn from each other, right? So technology is that way wonderful. It has allowed us to do this now, right? We can all work in separate places and then come together with our findings, right? So there are those kind of opportunities. There are actually sort of opportunities in which you go to a place. So there are short-term trips, right? So so our students are going, they're going all across the world, right? So some of them will go to, let's say, what are called some of the Western countries like London, or let's say US, or some Chicago or somewhere. But then the interesting thing is we have to realize that India's conditions are much closer to what we call the global south. So we have students actually going to, let's say, Vietnam, to Korea, to China, which are much more similar to our conditions, to Latin America, to Istanbul in Turkey, right? These are places where, you find the kind of conditions, the culture, much more similar to us, right? And so therefore they become interesting places for our students to go and say, okay, if in a similar culture, how are they dealing with it? Right? Yes. Because a place like Chicago or London, wonderful cities, I love them. I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in New York for a very long time, but the culture is really, really different. But if you go to a place like Istanbul in Turkey, right? You go to a South Korea, you go to some place in China, you realize that the cultures are very similar, and yet they are managing their built environment very, very beautifully, right? So there are all these kind of opportunities are there. It's not only that, we have a whole lot of people, because we are so connected, Abhishek, we have a whole lot of people who come in.
Absolutely.
Right. A faculty who comes in constantly to interact with our students, to hold special workshops, to hold what are called master classes. So all of that is there. It's a huge sort of a, too much for me to list at one go here, but that just gives.
But we do understand.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. So one more question is, I know you've already shared about how things are changing, but what is your take based on the, of course, vast experience in the industry, that how do you think the built environment as a domain will evolve, and what kind of structures we would require in a post-COVID-19 world? How do you think
I gave a talk the other day on precisely this, that how can designers, architects, all of us, how can we contribute to the post-pandemic world, right? It's very, see, this is what I mean. I'll give you an idea. Look at what happened during COVID, all right? There was no coordination of any decision that got taken. We did not have systems in which we could give even it's a simple case of what's called disaster mitigation. Like a flood happened. We get information to everybody at one go to say, this is what you need to do in order to do this. The reason for this is, in India, we have never developed what is called incremental system building. So one system on top of another system. So the communication on top of the infrastructure system, on top of the building system, on top of the legal system. This does not. Everybody is doing their own thing. This cannot go on. Right. That's the first change that has got to happen. This cannot go on. If this goes on, we will see the same things getting repeated that have been repeated for the last 60, 70 years in our country. We need to understand. That's why the term built environment is so interesting. It goes beyond architecture. It goes beyond the city. It goes beyond the park. It talks about totality. We have to think, we have to design, we have to work in totalities. Till the time we don't understand totalities and their interrelations, nothing can happen, right? Which is why I'm saying, I'll give you another very small example. Do you know when was the Delhi Metro first proposed? Any idea, anyone? Which finally got done after 2000. I mean, just again, there are no wrong answers, please. Don't worry about that. Just give a wild guess. When do you think it was proposed? Any idea?
I think the early 90s or something.
No, 1962. Can you believe 1962, right? From 1962, now imagine this.
40 years.
Everywhere else in the world, how is a city designed? You first make what is called the infrastructure, right? So you say, okay, this is how my rail is going to go. This is how my cars are going to go. This is where I'll give my. We don't do it like that. We just do whatever comes first. I mean, going back to the point of Gurgaon, sorry, we are dissing on the millennial city or whatever, but I apologize to everybody who lives in Gurgaon too. But it's very, can you imagine, in the whole of Gurgaon, they first made the buildings and then said, okay, we have to put sewer pipes now. It's the opposite. Oh, after we have made the buildings, now we have to put our trains and our metro system in. This cannot go on, right? And situations like COVID show you exactly how problematic this is. It brings you, so the only way you can deal with all of this is what? You say, okay, everybody lock down and stay in your house. But look at a comparative analysis of something like South Korea. South Korea did not do this. They did not have a complete lockdown. Why? Because their systems, their infrastructural systems, their design systems, their communication systems, their transportation system, everything was in sync with each other. So they could take what are called rational decisions based on evidence. Sorry, but हमारे देश में ये होता ही नहीं है. वो arbitrary, कोई किसी system पे काम ही नहीं कर रहा है. Right? So what is happening? कुछ भी चल रहा है. Right? I hope that answers your question.
I think that, sir, not just answers the question, I think it's a major takeaway from this. The point that you particularly mentioned about we have to work in sync, I think that answers a lot of questions that people might have in mind. Dipankar, any last take about anything or any question you have?
Congratulations, Dr. Chatterjee. I think that was a very, very comprehensive presentation from your end, and it did answer a lot of questions that I had proposed for you. I think this presentation has been really eye-opening on a lot of different fronts, especially because a lot of people think that it generally just refers to just buildings or construction work, etc. I think I love the concept about totality, and I loved how beautifully you put that systems are the ones that actually create the built environment, and they're pivotal to built environment. So yes. I love that concept, and I think a lot of students did have questions. I do want to request maybe a little bit of time from your end for the questions that have come from students, sure. Which is if they want to be able to reach out to you on a personal front, maybe write you an email, etc. I think they need to be able to ask a few questions after the excellent presentation that you've given today.
Please, I would love to hear from any of the students who have attended this. If you want, if you have more questions, feel free to write to me. My email, I don't know if you can share my email, but you can always just do a search for me, Joydeep Chatterjee, and you will get it on Google too. But you can share my email. My email is jchatterjee@jgu.edu.in. All right, which is there. In fact, I showed you the photographs of a lot of the faculty members. I would encourage you to go and talk to them. Right. It's wonderful. If you want to know more about the program, you can write to us directly. You can also write to the director of our admissions, Azad Ali. You can share that information too. I'm seeing some questions coming. Can I take those?
Absolutely. I think there's one very important question that how as a school student in class 11th or 12th, how do they need to prepare for a career in built environment?
So here's can I type my email in and then everybody will get it? Is that possible?
I have done it already. All
right, you've done that already. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Abhishek. All right, so here's one very good news for everyone as far as this program is concerned. These are all very funny hangovers in our country from the last 30-40 years. Nowhere else in the world does any design or architecture program really require PCM. Chemistry, maths is not required. I don't know why in India they constantly require it, right? So here's the interesting thing. So what do you want to prepare? Well, here's the thing. This program allows students from any discipline to come in. You know why? Because whatever discipline that you are doing, we need that expertise. So if you've done economics, that's not going to go to waste in this. Remember, this is about finance too. If you have done history, that is also important, right? So actually, students from any discipline can apply for this program. But what you need to do, which is very, very important, is that we do have what's called an aptitude test. And it's somewhat like the SATs of the United States, which is called the Scholastic Aptitude Test. So this is called the JSTAT, the General Scholastic Aptitude Test, right? So when we have to give an aptitude test, and then the entire process is a lot like an American university. We have a pretty involved application form. We have a set of interviews that we do because, there aren't 100,000 seats here because we want the course is very interactive. Our student to faculty ratio is only 1:9. So, it's a very select bunch that we take, right? It's 1:8, 1:9. It's because this course involves a lot of hands-on working, actually going there and working with real life clients, real life situations, working with the government. One of the faculty members, Professor Zaim Alpani, is now looking at how, in Delhi, the greatest rate of dropout for women students in high school is because they don't have proper bathrooms. Do you know that? So what Professor Malpani is doing an extensive study of all this, the girls' toilets in schools in Delhi to show how we can redesign them, right? So that means everybody working on the field. So these are the kind of projects which are there, right? So it involves a lot of hands-on kind of work, right? So for that, we have an interview process. We take your JSAT, which is there, and it goes ahead like that, right? Now, at this present time, this is a one-of-a-kind program in the country, right? It's a one-of-a-kind program in the country because, we've been able to pull together people from all over the world to come and teach on it. Like I said, if you actually do a search on Google and if you do built environments courses, you will see this course is there all over the world for a very long time. A wonderful example of such a course is actually the University of New South Wales in Australia. In fact, their school is called the School of Built Environment. In fact, if you go to London, one of the UCL school, which is the Bartlett, is called the School of Built Environment. In fact, more and more architecture schools are changing their name. They are going to start calling themselves schools of built environment, right? So it's there all over, it's there. But for the first time, what we have done is created this course in India. We've actually got it accredited. We've got it taken permission from the Haryana State Education Board. So it's a fully accredited program, which has all of these wonderful things that you can do a part of, right? Okay. Now, somebody else had another question. I'm just trying to. So somebody asked me a question. Amia Derek asked the question. I want to specialize in residential spaces. What kind of minor should I take in order to do that? Well, Amia, excellent question. Residential spaces are some of the most complex spaces in the world. You would think it's easy, but actually no. Just imagine, just imagine trying to make a space for 5 people who have got to live all the time who are completely different. It's one of the most complex spaces. Actually, a hospital is very easy. I'll tell you why. Because it's very technical. But your house is where you are constantly staying, right? It has to have all kinds of spaces, right? So a wonderful minor to take if you want to specialize in, let's say, residential spaces would actually be something like sociology or psychology, which tells you how does culture and our individual psyche work? How do spaces affect us where we live all the time, right? So something like psychology, something like sociology would be a fantastic minor, right, for you to combine, right? Because these are the kind of subjects which help you understand people best. They help you understand how intimately people think. And that is what you need to know in order to design wonderful residences, right? Because residences are where we live out our entire lives, right? So that's why that's so important. Okay? Nandika asked a question: how can I prepare as an 11th grade student? Nandika, here's what I'm going to say: if you have a passion, and if you're interested in working with the city to improve your city, to improve your neighborhood, try to get opportunities like that, right? There are so many opportunities nowadays. In fact, we were going to do this summer, but because of COVID, we could not do it. But most probably next summer we'll do it, is that we'll have this small summer school for somebody who wants to come and work, So you might want to apply for that, right? Come and work with us. We will give you a short taste of what does it mean to actually go and work with a not-for-profit in India, right? How do you get a change made at a neighborhood level in India? How do you actually go and look at a policy and you get the laws changed there? You know, our building bylaws have not been changed in the last 70 years. Can you believe it? The world has changed, but our bill. So today, if you want to make a new, Dipankar talked about the third spaces there. We can't do half of those things because these laws are 70 years old.
Right.
We need to change those laws. How do we do things like that, right? So for somebody who's interested something like that, you might want to do the design course in community development, but do a minor in legal studies. It's a fantastic combination, right? So many avenues will become open to you, right? Let me see if the,
So, I mean, I think that's again a very good point where you highlighted about different avenues. I think, sir, I've shared your ID. They can reach out to you because I think the questions won't stop because they really want to speak to you. And thank you so much, sir, once again. It was great speaking to you.
my
And
pleasure. Thank
students,
you for having me.
we have another webinar on 22nd where sir will be a part of that as well. So you can again join us on 22nd. Thank you so much, Dipankar. Students, I know you have a lot of queries. I've posted our email ID on the top, hello@mindler.com. You can please write to us. You have sir's ID also. If you have any questions for sir, you can post message that to us. We will pass it on to sir for sure. And thank you so much for being a great audience. If you have any queries, I know your results are just out. There are a lot of things that you are anxious about. You want to know about admissions and everything. Do remember, Mindler is always there to help you out on that. So please do reach out to us. I'm again emphasizing the email IDs here. And don't hesitate. We are there for your journey and helping you out. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dipankar.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Keep
sir.
the questions coming whenever you want. I'm ready to answer them. Don't worry. Thank you so much, Abhishek.
Thank you, sir.
It was a wonderful experience. Lovely to be here.
Same here, sir. Thank you, sir.
Likewise, sir. Please take care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. Bye bye.